the nature of your emergency?
Welcome back to the Tactical Living Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Wilton, joined by Sergeant Wilton. Clint, how are you?
I'm good.
Something that I don't hear people talk about is marriage after trauma, especially in a first responder relationship. And this could be because of the first responder. It could be because of your spouse. But I think that's something that a lot of people should talk more about is the reality that a lot of first responder couples face after trauma exposure. Both partners might feel like the other one has changed, and it might be difficult to be able to understand or even learn or relearn how to reconnect with one another.
And I think the one thing is huge is being able to communicate with one another of what's going on. And you know, say the spouse isn't involved in that traumatic incident, whatever it may be. So they might or might not have an understanding of what you as an individual are going through in that instance. But they're never going to be able to know if you never communicate with them about what occurred. And you can do it in such a way as being able to articulate it to where they can see, okay, why is this impacting you the way that it is?
And I want to be clear here because we often think that trauma is just related to that first responder, but I'm putting myself in the mind as a female mother who's at home with her 2 kids by herself and them screaming and me having to do all of the demands of the household, and that type of situation is also traumatic. And so I think that trauma doesn't just affect the first responder, and it reshapes communication, emotional availability, expectation, safety within the relationship even. And I think it's important to just explore how couples can navigate those changes without interpreting that type of thing as rejection or failure or even a loss of love.
And I think one of the biggest things to remember is you're a team. You are in this together, and not working against each other to say, well, you're not doing this, and start targeting each other. And this is why I'm feeling this way. It's like, work together to find solutions. Don't demonize one another to make the problem worse.
We've heard of PTSD and CPTSD, but one concept psychologically that I've never heard anybody talk about is post-traumatic relationship shift. So I thought that we can kind of touch on that a little bit today, because after trauma, your nervous system adaptations can alter how individuals express their emotion, even how they seek connection and how they experience safety. So this is going to create relational shifts where partners might feel like they're unfamiliar with each other. And even while they love each other still and they're committed to each other still, there's a shift that takes place. And if you don't understand what it is, it's going to be hard to identify the things that you can do in order to be able to improve that.
Yeah, and when you're going through these situations, it's being able to, the first thing, and we've talked about this time and time again, is that self-recognition, that ownership of what is actually occurring, and being able to be there and support one another, to be able to recognize, okay, these are the dynamics that have shifted. And Ashley's made mention multiple times is like, we have business meetings regularly. If there's something going on, like, we will talk to each other about it and we'll work through it. And it's that shared partnership. You got into this marriage, you got into this relationship together, like, let's work through this together. I think over time, it's easy for us to fall back on, well, we're together, but we don't really feel together because we're not, working that partnership. You're not building this relationship to keep progressing further.
And I think that when it comes to post-traumatic relationship shifts, it can look a lot of different ways. The first is that there could be this emotional distance with one another without any kind of clear conflict. Maybe you didn't argue about something or nothing necessarily seemed to go wrong, and yet that emotional distance might feel like it's there. Some people might misinterpret withdrawal as rejection. That happens a lot, right? And then that creates even more distance because it perpetuates. It's the snowball effect. Or maybe difficulty discussing really difficult experiences, and having changes in your intimacy or your communication, or even grieving how that relationship used to feel. And in my experience in working with clients, a lot of the times that level of grieving usually happens independently, because you don't feel like you can go to your partner. You don't feel like you can be expressive. You feel like there is that emotional distance. There is no conflict. So you don't want to bring up another problem to create more discrepancy in what already feels a little bit volatile.
Yeah. And I think with everything, and we talked about this in a previous episode of, when we start experiencing grief associated to not having the realistic expectation of what our profession is, or what this whole dynamic is in our lives, and then we start harboring those resentments, those negative emotions and feelings, to start having that internal shift that it's ultimately hurting us, and we keep going down this downward spiral instead of trying to come out of it and ultimately coming out of it together. I think all in all, I think everybody throughout their lives are going to experience these traumatic incidents, whether it's something severe and crazy that you never thought you would see or do, or as Ashley said, it's having a crazy household because, you have 2 young kids, you're trying to keep everything up and operational. You're trying to find this time of, these are big life changes. These are big life instances to where we have to adapt our life from where we were before to where we are now.
So how do we actually know that trauma is impacting the relationship? I think that the first could be that you feel like you're living with a different person. I hear this all the time where it's like, well, we're basically just roommates. That's definitely a sign that there's something going on that at the very least needs to be investigated a little bit.
Yeah, I think when we start having you're going through this daily monotony of you're just there together, but there's not you're going through the motions, but you're not sitting back and really listening and being with one another and sharing that compassion, that love that you shared from the very beginning. We have to reignite that every day, and we should be.
Something else that I see is a lot of times conversations feel more guarded and openness feels harder. And for some people, they turn on this filter with their spouse when they are communicating. And
that filter, it's there, it exists. And I look at it as you're shopping online somewhere, you're trying to figure out, right now I need to buy a pair of boots. So I filter all these different things of what boots I'm looking for. And so you're not seeing everything else. You're not seeing the whole picture associated to it. You're only seeing what you want to see, and that's it.
So we don't have time for that anymore. You just pop that into ChatGPT's agent and say, here's what I want, go find it for me, and let it crawl around.
That's great.
I think too, sometimes people just miss that emotional closeness, but they don't know how to rebuild it.
And I think I've talked with a close friend of mine for a long time. At a certain point in our lives, we stop learning new. We stop trying to further expand ourselves. And I talk to people on a regular basis. When's the last time you actually learned something new? When's the last time you actually tried thinking outside the box to change a dynamic or a situation you're in, instead of trying to do what hasn't worked over the last 100 times?
There are ways to be able to love through the change. And I think that when we normalize that change doesn't mean disconnection, then it allows us to just understand that growth can feel unfamiliar, but that doesn't mean that it's bad.
Change is one of the hardest things that we have to experience on a regular basis, because it's uncomfortable. It's out of the ordinary, and people fear change more than anything else because we are creatures of habit. We love routines. We love everything. So you don't have to look at it as change as something so severe to where it's going to be a life-changing in an instance, but you can do those minimal changes over time, because then you start creating new habits.
One thing that when I'm working with clients, I hear them ask me all the time is, Ash, how do I do that? What's the actual tactic? And this is something that's been in my back pocket for myself and to share with other people, because there's nothing worse than walking on eggshells around anybody, but especially in your home. And most importantly, with the person that you're supposed to have the deepest, most intimate connection with. So something that you can do is to just create a safe space for gentle vulnerability. And the easiest way to be able to rebuild connection direction gradually is to use this line. And it's something along the lines of, you have to take a couple deep breaths usually, but it's, hey, I need to have a very difficult conversation with you. And it makes me feel very uncomfortable because it's been quite a while since we've had a conversation like this before. Is it okay if we do that now? And don't feel like you're rejected if that person says no, but revisit the reason why they're saying no, because it could be either that they're deflecting and they too feel uncomfortable, or it could be that there's a higher level issue here, or it could be that there's simply not that emotional availability. So in that instance, very poignantly call it out and say, okay, you don't want to talk about it right now, and I respect that. When do you want to revisit this again?
Yeah, being able to have those timelines and getting that set in place and bringing it forward. It's not easy to bring that forward, but being able to set everything in place with an outcome to where you guys can come to an agreement together to have those conversations is super important to make those changes that you effectively want.
I hope you've gotten some value out of today's episode. If you have, do us a favor, drop a review, subscribe down below, and as always, know that I'm sending you a long, tight hug from my home to yours.